Hello, welcome to the Animal Resistance University. This is a consent training by Glenn WRL and Christine Perc. I hope you enjoy this training.
First of all, I want to thank everybody who is here, who is attending this this presentation, this training. Consent is something which we see that is not very normalized, not very known, it's not very practiced in our society, and therefore we made this training. First of all, I do want to give a trigger warning. This workshop is about consent, but also we'll talk about sexual assault, about victim blaming, about several things. So there might be some triggering moments for people, for survivors, etc. So I want to give that trigger warning up front. There will also some words, I will use some words which might be triggering as well. So be aware of that. If it is too much while the training is happening, or if you know it is going to be too much, please, you can always contact us and tell us that you couldn't follow the whole training, and then we can still go over maybe some points which you didn't have without all the triggering words or pictures, and we can still add you to the list so you can participate in events from us, because this is a safe space. We want to create a safe space in the future as well. Sexual assault is something our movement has always suffered from, and not only our movement, it's in the whole world, and that's mostly due to a lack of education about consent. And consent should be something which should be very simple, but if we look at the practical side of it, it usually is not. Why that is, I don't have an answer to that. The only thing I do have an answer to is that there is an urgent need to learn about what consent is. And by learning about it, by speaking about it, by starting this conversation, we keep our movement safe, we keep our people safe. And therefore, we also decided that consent will be a mandatory training for all people who want to participate in an event or action organized by us. So yeah, again, welcome to the consent training. We'll talk about what consent is, about how to normalize consent, about what sexual assault is, and how to prevent sexual assault. And then first of all, I want to show a little video. Most of you have already seen it. It's a very good video. It's very simple. It really puts it into place, and I think it gives a very good introduction to consent. So I'm gonna play it now. I should have sound.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, but you wanted tea last week, or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea. If you're still struggling.
Alrighty. I'm gonna ask Christine if she can help me out here, because I've been trying to get the chat, but somehow it is not popping up on my screen, and I don't know how. So when was the first time you've heard about consent? Did you receive some sort of sex education in school? And did sex education, if you had it, did it mention consent or sexual assault at all? And I want everybody or a couple people writing their answers in the chat. And then if Christine could maybe read them out loud, some of them, that would be awesome.
So Ben said no. Bob said he never had any sort of formal education. Never, yes. Sexual assault, yes, but consent was never taught in school. Yes. Okay, the chat is flipping. So many no's. Never in school. Ooh.
Yeah, I think the overall answer is no. Me myself,
Yeah.
when I look back in school, when I did had some sort of sex education in school, but we, like somebody said, I think we talked a little bit about sexual assault, very little though, but consent is something which was never ever mentioned. And that's basically already where the problem starts. It's so normalized in our culture to not talk about consent and to not know what consent is. Our parents don't educate us on this topic often. It's not a topic which often is discussed underneath friends. And like I said, it's not a thing which is educated in school. But then again, we see sexual assault all over the world happening. Like it says here, sexual assault is seen as more normal than consent is. We're not taught the importance of consent, and that's why we're also teaching each other and why we should hold each other accountable. And that's also why we are giving this workshop right now. When you look at the pop culture, at movies all over the world, we see actually very problematic behavior happening. It's very normalized, things which are actually really not okay. And one of the biggest factors of them as well is the porn industry. Due to the lack of sex education, many people don't even get sex education in school. teens when they are developing their interest in sex or sexual intercourse. They start, nowadays we have the internet, and they start Googling, and often watching porn is one of the most common ways for teens to educate themselves. And as we know, in porn, it is very common that consent is not given. They play kind of a role play where consent is not really happening, and porn is made up. It's a story. It's a movie. It's fiction, basically. In a way, it is, and therefore, it's also a reason why sexual assault is so normal, and why consent is a thing we don't talk about. But also, for example, catcalling. It's also a way of doing something without consent. It's so normalized that even people are defending this kind of behavior. And it's very important to unlearn these kind of behaviors. And by unlearning, we must start with ourselves. We must, first of all, educate ourselves. And then we must lead by example, spread our knowledge, and educate others. Also, by making consent a very common topic to talk about, to bring it up into a conversation with your friends, to talk with your partner, to talk with somebody you might have sexual intercourse with, to talk about it, to have a conversation about what consent is. Because we must collectively work together towards a liberated world, a world where everybody's safe, a world where everybody's free. And that is not possible without considering, educating, and talking about consent. There are a lot of stereotypes about sexual assault. When I ask you to think about one person, just one individual who could be a survivor, just want you to have an image of a person who is a survivor in your head. And then I also want you to think about one individual which is a perpetrator. For one image in your mind of an individual. Most likely, these images you have in your mind right now are very stereotypical. And it is very important to acknowledge that a victim or a perpetrator can be from any ethnic background, from any race, any sex, any gender, any age. It can be basically anyone. Anyone can be a victim, anyone can be perpetrator. There is no such thing as a stereotype of a survivor or of a perpetrator. If we are gonna look at numbers, we do see that most of the people who suffer from sexual violence are often groups which are the most oppressed. And the groups, the top three, I would say, it's horrible to say it in this way, are women of color, bisexual women, and transgender women. Those are the three groups which are most often, which the numbers are highest in the research to sexual assault. There are also a lot of myths about sexual assault. And the first one I want to share with you is that sexual assault is an act of lust and passion that cannot be controlled. This is a very big myth. Sexual assault is often about power and control, and is often not motivated by sexual gratification. It is not done out of lust. It is not done out of passion. It's often done out of the ability and the ability of taking power over someone, about having that feeling of having power over someone. And that's also why we see that often members of more oppressed groups are often victim of sexual assault. A person cannot sexually assault their partner or spouse. That is not true. Nearly 1 in 10 women, so that's 10% of all the women, have experienced rape by an intimate partner in their lifetime. I think that number just says enough. That's 10% of, if we put 10 people, I think we have about 75 when I joined, let's say 80 people in this call. Let's say that's 40, about half women, about half men, I will say, to make the numbers easy. That means that there are about 40 women in this call. That would mean that there would at least be 4 women who are sexually assaulted by their partner. I think that number just speaks for itself, and that a person can be sexually assaulted by their partner or spouse. People that have been sexually assaulted will be hysterical and crying. That's also not true. Everyone responds differently to trauma. Some people may even laugh. Other people may cry. And some people maybe even show no emotion. It's a thing. When somebody has trauma, when somebody shows symptoms of trauma, it's not one thing. It's not always hysterical and crying. There might be some people who are hysterical and who cry a lot. There are also people who react very differently on everything. Men are not victims of sexual violence. Although the percentage of women is higher, still men can be victims of sexual violence as well. I did research about some numbers. 1.5% of all men have experienced sexual assault. And if we're gonna look at bisexual men, it's even higher. It's 47% of bisexual men have experienced some form of unwanted sexual contact. And I think that number is really high. So saying that men cannot be victims of sexual violence is also a myth. Another one, prostitutes cannot be raped because they are selling sex. That is not true. Prostitutes have the right, unlike anybody else, to withhold consent, to not give consent to any sexual activity, and therefore a prostitute can be sexually assaulted too. Getting help is expensive for survivors of assault. That's also a myth which is being told. Nowadays, especially with the internet, there are a lot of free, even very low costs.
Glenn, can I interrupt you?
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked if there's a reason behind why the numbers of bisexual men are higher.
Yeah, I didn't find that in the information I looked up. I assume again the LGBTQ is more oppressed as the straight people. Yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with that as well, because bisexual men are often even within the LGBTQ community oppressed. So again, like it says the very first one. No, I talked about that. Yes, the very first one. That sexual assault is often a thing about power and not about lust. and bisexual men are a lot more oppressed as even gay men, or a lot more as straight men, and therefore probably are the numbers higher as well. I hope that answered the question. So was it getting help is expensive for survivors of assault? I did a little research in my own local area, and in Belgium we do have therapists which are very low budget to go to, but we also do have a free hotline where you can just call them, and we also have a free anonymous chat service. So it's just an online service where you can chat with someone who is professionally known on how to react and how to respond and how to talk with survivors of sexual assault. And then last but not least, people with disabilities are at low risk for sexual assault. Again, it's about power, and people with disabilities are often also more oppressed as people who are able, who are more able, and therefore also twice as much actually sexually assaulted as somebody who is more able. And then I also have some facts about sexual assault. The first one, only 2 to 8% of sexual assault, I made a spelling mistake there, cases are falsely reported, the same percentage as for any other felonies. If we see that people come out with stories about sexual assault, they're always questioned, and you will always hear the statement that the person is lying, not telling the truth is manipulating, is doing that out of revenge or wanting to destroy somebody's reputation. But if we look at the numbers, that is very, very unlikely. Only 2 to 8% of all sexual assault cases are falsely reported. And therefore, the chance of it being false is very low. And it's unlike any other felony, so any criminal thing is falsely reported, but we never see, for example, when a burglary happened and somebody is telling about that somebody broke into their home and stole loads of stuff. Nobody is saying, oh, but that's false, because there is just such a high percentage. It's the same percentage of false reports as for sexual assault. So that's also a number I was really impressed by when I found out, because you hear so often that people are talking about falsely reported cases of sexual assault. Also, 55% of rape or sexual assault victimizations occur at or near the victim's homes. When we go back to the stereotypical thoughts, when we think about sexual assault or when we think about rape, we often think about walking home alone from a party late at night when it's dark in like a sketchy part of town, in a small alley or in the woods. And that's actually not true. Most of the cases actually happens at the home of the survivor, and or even near the home. And I believe I didn't know the town, so I don't have the exact percentage, but I believe it was 17 to 20% sexual assault would happen at a friend's home as well. So then when we think about how much sexual assault is not happening in a familiar place of the survivor, of the victim, then it's really not that much. I did some research about the US, I found, and I also did some research about my local area. In the US, victims older than 12 who are raped or sexually assaulted is an average of almost 300,000 people. 300,000 people above 12 years old are sexually assaulted only in the US. If I then did a research on the area I'm from, and I'm from Belgium, it's a country with about 11 million people. You can kind of compare that to a city like LA. I think LA has about 11 million as well. Every day, there are 3 reports of group rape, 8 reports of rape, and 10 reports of any other form of sexual assault. And the dark truth is actually even harder, because 90% of all forms of sexual assault are not reported. So those numbers, 3 reports of group rape, 8 reports of rape, and 10 reports of any other form of sexual assault, is only 10% of all the sexual assault which happens. Another fact about sexual assault is that many survivors experience what they call tonic immobility, which we also know as the freeze response. Like I said, it's often about power dynamics. It's often the perpetrator is out of a group which is more privileged, which often oppresses the group where the survivor is from. It's not always, but that's often the case. And it then becomes a very natural but unwanted reaction. It's a natural response of the body when you are in a certain situation of distress and when there is a factor of fear as well. The combination of that stress and that fear is often a result into tonic immobility or the freeze response. And then the last one, 3 out of 4 perpetrators of sexual assault is known by the survivor. So again, when we go back to the stereotypes, we often think about a stranger, but that's often not true. The numbers are 48% of the time it is a partner, 13% of the time it is a friend, 10% it is someone from the family, 7% it is a colleague, which if you calculate, only 15% of all sexual assault cases are done by strangers. So that stereotype of that the perpetrator is someone, a stranger, is not really true, because only 50% of all cases are done by strangers. And then
can I interrupt you again? Because I think Anita wants to say something, and there's a lot going on in the chat. But...
If I may.
Sure.
Just quickly, because there's a disagreement, or not disagreement, but like talking about details of events that happened to us. And I'm working with Dusan on a post for that we post also, we say trigger warning if we're going into something where we say things that might trigger other people's memories or giving them flashbacks, because in the chat we are discussing, and I think it's important.
Yes, this topic is
even from,
I'm sorry?
Yeah, just refrain from too many details, please, for survivors.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is a very sensitive topic, and a lot of people are triggered by it. So I think indeed it's very important when you talk about it, or when you make a post about it, it's very important to put that trigger warning there as well. So yeah, sexual assault is a thing. And I want, again, if everybody or a couple people can answer in the chat, when you think of the term sexual assault, what does come to mind? And then if Christine can help me out again.
No, no one is writing in the chat.
So, can everybody or a couple people write in the chat what you think when you hear the term sexual assault?
Helplessness, rape, unwanted kissing, unwanted touching, someone occupying my space, feeling angry, lonely, dirty, disrespecting, violence, disgust, unwanted power play, violence, nightmares, forceful behavior without consent, control, manipulation, crime.
Okay, thank you. They're all really great answers. I want to go a little more into our sexual harassment policy and what we as animal resistance see as forms of sexual assault. Also want to mention if any of the following complaints are made, we will start an investigation, and the consequences might differ from situation to situation. But there might be a possibility that somebody will be removed from all events which are organized by us, and that for an indefinite period of time. So things we as animal resistance see as sexual assault are sexually charged comments, unwelcome sexual advances, invitations, or threats, inappropriate touching, groping, and unwelcome sexual advances, inappropriate physical contact, including any non-consequential physical contact, or any other behavior that makes another community member sexually uncomfortable. Those are the things we listed up. It's also a thing which we are still working on. So if you want to take a look at our sexual harassment policy, please send us a message to look what is in there. There's a little more explanation in the whole document. I just had to list up a little summary of what is sexual assault for us, and when we will start an investigation, and when there might be consequences if those are violated. So if you do have some things you want to add to it, or you don't agree with, you can always get in touch with us. So I just wanted to leave this here. And then coercion. Coercion can mean a lot. It basically means that there is force of pressure involved. And this pressure, this can be very obvious, but this can also be very subtle. I split them up in 3 different categories. It is physical coercion, threats of physical coercion, and emotional coercion. So coercion is a little bit manipulating. It is forcing someone, pressuring someone into something, into sexual intercourse, or into anything which has to do with that. So then I also want to go to every category in specific. The physical coercion, again, I want to ask everybody to write an example of physical coercion in the chat. what you think can be a physical coercion.
Threat of domestic violence, inciting until you give up, pressuring you to have sex until you say yes, holding someone down, blocking someone from leaving, stepping into person's space when they have not invited you, unwanted touching. Men who speak loudly and behave aggressively can be coercion without them being aware.
Yeah, I do hear a couple which I would personally put within the threats or even emotional coercion. Physical coercion means more actually physically doing something. So what I listed up is holding someone down. So actually pressing someone against something, or pushing someone against a wall, or holding them in place, basically, so they have no chance to escape. Spiking someone's drink, it's also an act you actually do. Or even using a knife or any dangerous object. These are more like the extremer things, I would say, really the physical things. But then we also have threats of physical coercion. Can you also answer in the chat a couple examples what you think could be threats of physical coercion? I also already heard a couple of those examples with the physical coercion. Are there some answers in the chat?
Threatening to beat, so threatening to lie about them to others, to kick them out, yeah, potential consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is the couple things up. Smashing something when somebody says no. So throwing a glass or something which is in your area, like close towards the person, is a threat of like, if you're not going to listen, I'm actually going to hurt you. Or like even smashing it on the ground or wherever is a threat to physical coercion. Saying I will hurt you, so actually threatening to hurt a person, saying that out loud. But also blocking someone's exit. So if you're not touching somebody yet, I wouldn't say that is already physical coercion, but if you block someone's exit, it gives the threat that they will be physically blocked. So this is, I also put this in the list of threats. And then the last one, emotional coercion. This is the one which happens most of the time. This is everything which has to do with the mind. Everything how you emotionally manipulate somebody. So I want to hear some of those examples in the chat as well. The reason I do this is because there are so many forms of coercion, and the ones I listed are not the only ones, and I want to hear some more examples for everybody in this call to also know more than just the ones I listed up.
Blackmailing someone's physical well-being if they say no, threat of leaving someone, the chat is flipping. who are emotionally attached to you or even threatening to commit suicide unless sex is consented, calling them weak if they don't do something, slut shaming. I came all this way to visit you, wanting something in return. Are you gay or something? Non-consensual betitling or degrading.
Yes, I think those are all very good examples. The one I've listed up is repeatedly asking someone until they're worn down. So keep asking and asking and asking again and again and over if they want to have sex is emotional coercion. Consent is something which is given without pressuring someone, and by repeatedly keeping asking the same question, you are pressuring someone into doing something they initially do not want. But also emotional threats, like I'll break up with you if you don't have sex with me. So emotionally threatening somebody. Blackmailing, for example, I'll tell everyone you're gay if you don't. But as well, guilt tripping, and an example I think which is really often used is, if you really loved me, you would have sex with me, and that by that sentence, the other person, if you say the sentence, will feel guilt, and therefore it is not true consent. And we did already talked a lot about consent, but what is consent actually? What is the kind of definition of it? Consent is giving permission without any fear, any force, any fraud, and also having the capacity to do so. It doesn't always have to be verbal, but it needs to be real, obvious, and ongoing. Consent is all about communication, and there are many ways to give consent, but it always needs to be enthusiastic and it needs to be clear. And I want to go into the next one as well, into a couple examples of what consent can be. But I first want to hear some examples. Again, I have listed up some of them, but I want to hear in the chat what are examples of giving consent. Or what do you think are examples of giving consent?
Or to the yes man, yes, I want you to do X to me. Returning the touch, saying yes. Yes, I want to.
Yes, exactly. First of all, the enthusiastic yes. A yes can also be forced and is not always true consent. So that's something to be very aware of. A yes needs to be enthusiastic. There can also be a thumbs up. When you ask a question and there's a thumbs up, that's also giving consent. Actively nodding yes. So actually not by accident, like doing this, but actually saying yes with your head. But also pulling someone closer while you are initiating sex and somebody pulls you closer. That's often an example of consent. Actively touching someone back, and initiating sexual activity yourself is also a form of consent. Then I also have a couple examples of how you can ask for consent. When the things we just talked about are not clearly given, when it is not enthusiastic like it always should be, you should always ask verbally about consent. Again, consent is all about communication, and the best is to actually have a conversation about consent before you are doing anything sexual. By having this conversation up front, you will ensure that you both know what consent means, and it will also make you both feel more safe, that those boundaries will also be respected. And having that conversation up front also will give both of you more confidence of actually saying no. And often when we talk about asking for consent, the reaction we get is that this would ruin the sex, that asking questions are awkward, that it would just ruin the moment, and that it wouldn't be fun anymore. And I think that comment really states on how consent is not normalized in our society, how it is not normalized while we are initiating sex or while we are having sexual intercourse. Because if these questions are not comfortable to you, I would say do so until they become comfortable asking. And they can be very quick, very easy questions like, is this okay? Are you comfortable? Do you want to slow down, or do you want to take it further? Those are questions where you actually ask for consent. And these questions are really important while asking while you initiate or you are having sex. And again, if these questions do not feel comfortable, that I think amplifies more on how consent is not normalized. And is this okay? Is such a short question to ask, and it really like won't ruin the moment. It's so easy to also answer a quick yes or a head nod, or it's so easy to also answer, and by doing so, you know you have consent, and you know you both feel comfortable with doing. And asking if they want to take it further instead of just doing is also one which is very easily done. Examples of things that are not consent. I also want to elaborate a little bit on this, and I also want to ask people to write in the chat, what are things that are not consent? Are there some answers? I think Christine froze. Veronique, can you maybe help me out? Or someone?
Yeah, I can read some if you want.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, after no, pushing someone away, turning away your body from him or her. No, pushing them away, not responding. Removing their hand from your body, pushing them away, being passive, not doing anything. Leaning away while the other moves closer, being awkward, a lack of an enthusiastic yes, clear no, push away signs, saying no or moving away.
Yes, I think those are all
Saying
really great examples. I want to thank everybody for sharing their opinion and being so interactive and answering to the questions. The things I listed up are what a person is wearing, whatever somebody is wearing, how little somebody is wearing, how little clothes somebody is wearing. It does not give consent. Consent has nothing to do with what somebody is wearing. How a person is acting, if a person is acting in a certain way. If a person is sexually acting or talking about sex or anything that also does not give consent. Assumptions based on what a person has consented to before. If a person has consented to having sex with you last week or yesterday or even a couple hours before, it does not mean that you have consented at this very moment. Consent to a different activity. There are different ways of having sexual intercourse. Kissing is also no consent to taking it further. Foreplay is no consent to taking, to actually penetrating. So those are also things to have in mind, that you always have to ask consent if you are gonna take another step. And again, like I said, those questions should be very easily and short and quickly be amplified and not ruin the moment. And also consent at a different time. Again, if somebody consented a couple hours before to doing it later, or consented in the beginning of the week to having sex in the weekend, it does not mean that you have consent today or in the when you see each other. So it's always important to be aware of consent and to ask for it. Other examples of things that are not consent is consenting to something and then changing your mind. Somebody can consent to something, but people can switch their minds. And if people switch their minds, yes, it sucks. It really sucks. But if somebody changed their mind in the middle while something is happening, that is possible, and continuing is then doing something without consent or considered sexual assault. Coercion is also not consent, like we talked about. Not saying anything at all is also being silent, is not consent. Pushing you away is not consent. That's a very clear one, I think. And vague answers are also no consent. A maybe is also no consent. And actually often means no, because maybe is an answer out of fear or not sure. And when somebody is not sure, it is better to first talk about it, and to it means that the person isn't 100% comfortable doing with what you're asking, and therefore it does not mean consent. Inability to consent. There are also certain situations where somebody is unable to give consent. And again, I want to ask everybody here to answer in the chat what you think can be an inability to consent.
Being asleep, being drunk, being blackout, being on drugs, being tired, yeah, sleep again and drunk, disabilities, age, being upset.
Yes, those are all really great answers. One of them is also language and cultural barriers. If you do have a language difference, it might not be clear what you're asking. So that's always something to be aware, that language and that there might be language or cultural barriers as well. Developmental disabilities and some cases of mental health conditions are also an inability to consent. Certain age differences, For example, in Belgium, you can only give consent from the age of 16. So if you are below 16, you can legally not give any consent. And as well, if somebody's older as 18, you cannot get consent from somebody who is younger than 18. So certain age differences, but also, like I already talked about, power dynamics. If somebody is from a more oppressed group as somebody else, this can also give a inability to consent. Of course, influence of drugs or alcohol. I think that's a very common answer. It's also a thing which is most talked about when talking about consent, that when somebody is on drugs or on alcohol, that there is an inability to consent. And then, of course, being unconscious or asleep. When somebody is unconscious or asleep, they cannot give you consent. They are not awake, they're unconscious, and therefore it's always an inability to consent. And then the last part of what I'm going to talk about, to run it up a little bit, and then I'm going to give the word to Christine, is that consent is always clear and enthusiastic. Anything which happens, anything sexual related which happens without consent is considered sexual assault. And again, I cannot repeat enough that consent is always clear and always enthusiastic. Consent is about communication, and therefore communication is key, like I said. Talk about it with friends, talk about it with your partner, talk about it with somebody you will or might be having sexual intercourse with. Having that conversation up front really helps, really makes you get onto that same level, so you both know what consent is. You also, I think, if you both know what if you know that the other person knows what consent is, it also makes you feel more safe. It's also unlearning and learning to amplify those questions. If it doesn't feel comfortable, let's make them comfortable while using them. It's also about acknowledging the power dynamics, again, about communicating, about respecting each other's boundaries. Consent can prevent hurt, can prevent pain, can prevent trauma. And consent is basically about preventing that another victim or another victim of sexual assault and another survivor of sexual assault. And I think on that note, I want to give it to Christine, because Christine will be talking more about victim blaming, about the hurt, about the pain, about the trauma, and all things considered that. So I'm quickly going to stop sharing my screen, and then Christine can start sharing hers.
So, can you see the presentation?
It is only a small part of it. You still need to... You can drag that green thingy.
Ooh.
You can
This
also
is
make
how
it bigger.
technique works. Okay. So like this.
Still half of the text.
Oh, okay. Wait. I'm gonna try again. Sorry for that. So What about now?
Still loading. Yes.
Oh. Okay, I need a second because I can't see my notes.
We can see your notes. No. Okay. Not anymore.
Okay.
No, wait. There's. Sorry for these technical problems.
Yeah, but I can't move my notes. I'm so sorry.
Maybe you can just screen everything and have your notes on your phone or something.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
sorry. So now you can see everything, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm just using my phone for the notes. So another important topic we want to talk about is victim blaming. And victim blaming can trigger and also worsen the effect of the sexual assault for the victim. So when a survivor is talking about it and we blame them for it, it can like really be harmful for them. So people often say things to them or ask questions that can make them feel like what happened was their fault, and this is called victim blaming. So now if Glenn can help me out, you can write some questions or common phrases in the chat what you think is victim blaming, or if you heard something before.
She wanted it before. Look how they're dressed. They asked for it. Saying that the victim wanted it. Why did you go there? Why did you go to their place? They deserved it. They had XI on. She was drunk. Are you sure? You should have not worn that dress. They didn't say no. She was going around half naked. They provocated it. She consented to getting in the same bed. She's my wife.
Okay.
I don't think it was abuse.
Okay, thank you. So thanks for sharing. I have a few more. I think you all mentioned these in the chat before. So it's just like a conclusion. What did you expect? Were you drunk? But they are such a nice person. They didn't mean it. Were you clear with them? Did you say no? Did you fight back? I think all of them were mentioned in the chat before. And these questions or statements can make it seem like the assault happened because of something what the person or what the victim did or did not do. So survivors are often experience self-blame because they hear all these blaming from their friends if they share what happened to them. So they start to blame themselves. Yeah, and this can make it like really hard for them to heal. And sorry, I have to switch all the Okay, so everyone's story matters, and this is why I did not include any numbers in my part, because I think it's really triggering, and every story is different because we are all different. And I think you can compare experience to another experience, but so many of them, oh no, sorry, I start again. But why are so many cases going unreported? Glenn mentioned that before. So this is also a reason why victim blaming is so harmful, because we see how survivors are being treated. So if something happens to us, we don't want to open up. And it's not like there are too many cases. There are, but even if it's just one case, it's wrong, and it matters, and every story matters, and every experience. And if you feel, if you don't want this to happen, yeah, it matters, and your story is important. So it's important to remember that blaming survivors for what someone else has perpetrated to them actually increases everyone's vulnerability, because we are denying that rape or assault can happen to anybody. The fact that survivors are often blamed for what happens to them is one of the biggest reasons people don't seek help after an assault. Yeah, we saw that in the numbers Glenn was sharing. So now we know that blaming can be extremely harmful for everyone, not only for the victim. So what can we do when a victim is being blamed, and we see this, or it comes to our attention, we read it on social media, or we hear our friends blaming someone? So if you can write that in the chat.
Educate about it.
What? Sorry?
Call it out. Educate about it.
Oh, okay.
Call it out as victim blaming and explain why this is hurtful. Be supportive. Speak up about it. You should feel complimented. Did you? Oh, that's an answer, I think, to the question before. Tell them to stop. It would probably be more blunt. Defend survivor. Let the survivor know we support them. Let the victim know you are listening and they are heard. Explain why this is harmful. Encourage the person who did the assault to apologize and to stop and to support the victim. Fight against should be our Bible in this movement. If the survivor is okay with it, share their story. Don't be silent when you witness victim blaming.
Okay, thank you. So someone mentioned that we should support the victim if it comes to our attention that someone is blaming them. So this is also the next point. So when it comes to our attention that someone is blaming the victim, and as we talked about or discussed about how to handle it, we can start going to the survivor, to the victim, and giving them support. So on the flip side of blaming someone, there's support. And imagine being in the following situation. A friend of you shares that they were sexually assaulted. So what do you do? Maybe someone experienced this before and wants to share this, or someone else came to them and shared a story. So what did you do?
I see someone sharing a link, and I've seen that website before. That's a really great one, the medium.com. Ask them if they want to talk about it and how you can support them. Listen to them. Start an open dialogue and empower them that sexual assault should be spoken about, because more it is hushed, it will make the assaulter believe that assaulting is okay. Listening to them and ask them how you can help. Make absolutely sure that your friend knows they are heard. Don't ask for details, don't ask questions or say there's not enough proof. Actively listen to them. Listen. Don't blame them. Do not ask them what happened. Don't say if they don't report to the police, it is not valid.
What was the last one? If you
Don't say if they don't report it to the police that it is not valid.
Don't say.
Don't say, yeah.
Okay.
Do not say.
Okay, thank you. So it's really important to keep in mind that if someone comes to us and open up about what happened to them, we should keep in mind that for the person it can be really difficult and it's really hard to talk about it, and it costs a lot of energy. So we should be extremely careful, and if we go back to victim blaming, we should be like really careful if asking questions or making statements is really helping them, is supporting them. So we should keep that in mind, and we should really try to be there for them. So yeah, I listed up a few. I think they're really important. So first of all, of course, this should be obvious. Believe them, and be there for them, and let them know that you're there for them. So you can say, you can call me anytime, and I will be there for you, and I can come to you, and I have this and this day. I'm free, I have off work, I can come to you. Then say that it's not their fault what happened to them. So make sure they know it's not their fault and they don't blame themselves for it. And offer your help. But this can be super, so we have to be sensitive with this, because the victim should make the decisions, and because sexual assault is an act of violence, and the power was taken from the victim. We have to make sure that we give the power back to the victim. So we should respect any decision they're going to make, and we have to respect that, and we have to support them. So if they don't want to do something, even if we as the supporter think that's a good way to do it, if they are not ready for it, and if they don't want to do it, we should respect that and support them wherever they are. So, and sexual assault can happen to anyone. And we talked about this before, Glenn talked about this before. that there's not a specific stereotype of victim, and there's not a specific person who is like more in danger of it. It can happen to anyone, and this also includes us. So this might be a bit triggering because we're talking about us now. So we talked about victim blaming and we talked about support, but now we're going to talk about what if it's happened to us. So if you do not want to say something, that's okay. You can close the chat. I just want to mention this before. And also for others, be careful what we are going to say now, because if we are not in the position before, which is really good, but we should be careful what we're saying. So what if it is me? So yeah, as I said, this could be really triggering for someone. And what do I want to remind myself of? What can help me? So I want to collect some things we can do to ourselves, or we can remind ourselves of if something like this happens to us, what we want from others to do for us, or yeah. This is a little bit of healing and self-care, how we can process something. You can write it in the chat and Glenn can read it out.
Find someone you trust and talk. That it's not my fault. There are people I can turn to for help. Meditation. I will talk about it whenever I'm ready. There is a PTSD app. Here are the comments I see right now.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for sharing. I also listed up a few I remind myself of. So first, I allow myself to take a break. So I allow myself to just do something else instead, do something nice, going out, and do something I enjoy. Second, I know that people care about me, and this can be, so for me, it's kind of easy now to do it. So when I really don't feel good, I just write a message to my friends and I'm like, hey, I'm not doing good. Can you please tell me you care about me? And I can really recommend that. For me, it's easy now, and I hope someone else can try to do it as well. Because I think it's really important that we start to communicate, even if we are not ready, even if we are harmed, we can just write a short message to our friends. Then I know that I can talk to others. So this is a little bit what I mentioned before with the message. But also I remind myself of, if I'm ready to talk about it, I know there are some people I trust and they will listen to me. And the last one is that I know it's okay to cry and not wanting to talk about it. So yeah, I let myself cry. I know it's okay. I know it's okay to have emotions, and yeah, I allow myself to be sad. And one thing I want to share is, so I don't know if Cheyenne is in the chat here, but she told me I should change my wallpaper on the phone. So now my wallpaper is saying, I am amazing, I can do anything, positivity is a choice. And this is really helping me because I read it every day. And yeah, I just want to share this.
I saw a comment which I found really helpful as well, and it says that that you are also okay to find professional help. That you also should tell yourself that that is okay, that you need some help from a professional. And I think that's I found that a very good comment, and we didn't talk about it yet. I wanted to share that comment. So thank you for the person who shared that.
Yeah. Thank you. So, if someone wants to share something as well before we go to apologizing. Is there anything in the chat?
The last comment I see is professional help shouldn't have any stigma at all.
Yeah.
But there's not really coming new.
Okay. So after talking about the harmful responses and support others and ourselves, it's time to recognize that nobody is without mistakes, and we all can do mistakes. We all can do something wrong, and our behavior is not perfect all the time. So I just want to clarify this. So I mean, if it was not our intention at all to harm someone, and after the training today, I think we are all able now to be a little bit more aware of this, and so we can recognize our wrong behavior by ourselves or someone else bring this to our attention. So what are some good ways of apologizing and what not to say when we are truly sorry and take fully responsibility for our previous behavior? So if you want to share something, please write in the chat and Glenn can read it out loud.
Be sincere, don't minimalize. This training should be the rule for the world, I think. Don't put if in the apology. Or but. And that's everything, which is okay. You're right, I'm so sorry. Apologizing with an if is not an apology. Sorry if I take responsibility and say that you are sorry that you hurt me. Don't make the apology about yourself. Don't expect anything in return from the survivor.
Okay. Thank you.
Somebody says, I just sent a message right now to apologize about something that happened last year, and now I realize it's bad. I said, shut the spring. I said this happened. I'm very sorry. What I did was not acceptable, even though I didn't mean it. This is not an excuse. Sorry, I hurt you. Don't say, I'm sorry you feel this way. This isn't an apology. Truly say sorry and change behavior towards the person, or even stop contact if the person wants that after saying sorry, and respect the survivor's wishes.
Okay, thank you. So probably most of them are already covered in the chat. I heard a lot of them, but most of them were about how not to apologize. I didn't hear so many about how to apologize. So how not to apologize, first of all, is blame. We should not only blame the victim as a third person, but also if we are involved in this. So if we are the one who mistreated the person, and it is really, really important to keep in mind we don't blame them, because this also leads back to shame again, to shame the victim, sorry. Then second is justifying. So I really want to underline this, because no one, and especially the victim, is not interested in like hearing any excuses why someone did something to them. So this also leads back to victim blaming. If we justify why we did something, why we hurt someone's feelings, and then also minimalize. It's not only disrespectful, it also gives a feeling of not being important enough, or the victim's feelings are not valid. And then also making excuses. This also leads into justifying and then back to victim blaming. And I think which is in combination really harmful for the victim. And I think it's better to just say nothing instead of just blame and justify and making excuses and yeah, all these things. So I think it's better to not apologize instead of apologizing in a harmful way, because this can really harm the process of healing from the victim. And how to apologize is, first of all, we should acknowledge that we did something wrong. And this also helps to rebuild our relationship to the person we hurt. And depending on the wrongful act, it can lead to a conversation about it, and they can understand what happened wrong in the situation, and we can understand why it was so harmful for them. And we should fully accept the responsibility of the situation, and that can be helpful and begin the process of healing for the person we hurt. And it also shuts down victim blaming, because we accept that we did something wrong. And then express. So acknowledging your wrongful behavior is a good beginning, but the heart of the apologizing is expressing the thoughts. I am really sorry. I hope you can forgive me. So we should really express our feelings to the victim, so they can understand and feel that we are truly sorry for it, and that we see what we did wrong. And it can also help with our self-confidence and self-respect if we take full responsibility for what we did wrong. So we can learn out of it and have like respect, self-respect. And the last one is, so while it is important to ask for forgiveness, we should keep in mind that the person we hurt is not ready for it. So we don't be pushy or rush into this, even if we really don't understand why the person is reacting like this. But we should respect that the person is not ready. And give them time to heal, and we can say we're sorry, but we should also give them time to heal and to come back to us. So what do you think make it so important for victims to hear that they feel, okay, I think this is a wrong sentence, to hear that, to feel that the one who hurt them is sorry for what they did. So what do you think makes it so important for someone being hurt and hear that the one who hurts them is sorry for what they did?
It validates their experience. It gives closure because it makes them feel heard and believed. They will feel more understood and believed. Those are the comments for now. It can be healing to know that the person learned from their mistake. It gives hope that people can change. It validates the survivor's feeling to know that the other person understands what happens and wants to change.
Mm-hmm.
Survivors and perpetrators got both opportunity to grow stronger and wiser. It lessens any guilt they feel themselves about the episode because they realize they did nothing wrong and guilt can disappear.
Okay, and if you can also share your opinion on what if we don't apologize? So if we do something wrong, if we behave in a wrongful way, what can happen with the one we hurt if we do not apologize and if we just ignore it?
You stay blocked. Preventing from moving on. It perpetrates the structure of oppression we are fighting. Someone is saying karma. No accountability for one's action. It hurts the survivor further.
Mm-hmm.
Trigger alert, depending on what happened, you can be responsible for someone's life.
Okay. Yeah.
If we don't apologize, we may repeat the action because there is no commitment to change without apologizing. More fear of it happening again. And you don't know if there will be more victims. Uncertainty and feeling of guilt.
Okay. Thank you. So I think you mentioned all. I'm just gonna check if there's something we didn't mention. No, we mentioned everything. So I just want to say it's important that we know that no one is without mistakes and that we all can harm others. So we should keep that in mind to rebuild the relationship we have to them, and that we build the trust to our our friends again, and build self-confidence and have respect for ourselves. Because if we are aware of something we did wrong, we acknowledge that, and so yeah, we can respect ourselves more. So last but not least, we want you to feel safe. So in society, we want to create a culture that normalizes consent practices. So we've been talking a lot about consent and sexual assault, and we want to normalize consent to create a safer space for everyone. And when we communicate with others, educate ourselves, and educate others as well, we can feel more safe in our community. So it's important to step back at some point and reflect. And I appreciate the training so much, and I really appreciate that so many attended. How can we normalize consent in our community, and what are some healthy practices we can do to normalize this and create a safer space in our community and in our society? If you can write this in the chat. And at the beginning, Glenn mentioned that sexual assault seems to be more normalized than consent is. So how can we like change this, that consent is normalized?
Keep talking about it. Education. I see some questions, but we'll answer the questions later. Practice what we preach. Not siding with the perpetrator. Practice consent with smaller actions like giving someone a hug. Practicing it, educating young or other people about it. Go to schools and try to give trainings in schools. Discussions about consent before any sexual act. Call out inappropriate jokes or inappropriate behaviors with peers. More trainings like this. Education, especially when it comes to stuff like porn or stereotypes. Teach it in schools. Make consent training embedded in our culture and systems such as school, workplaces. If your friend was accused with assault, don't tell them it's okay. You're a good person. Tell them you are wrong. You should take responsibility for it. Hold men accountable, even if they are your buddy. Incorporate consent training into our parent approach. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I have a few more as well, but I think we all mentioned them in the chat before. So most important is asking for consent, and if we recognize we do not have consent, we should stop whatever we're doing, and being aware of people's body language. And yeah, I just want to say this again, because we can all do mistakes and we can all misinterpret the body language. So again, we should ask for consent if we are not sure. And then we should check if they are under influence of a substance, and having conversations with partners about what we like and don't like sexually. And we should talk to each other about respect and consent. Yeah, that was my part.